I already made a video on how to learn a foreign language for free and how to maximize your learning process and get the most out of it. And I mentioned 3 techniques like shadowing, speaking time, and there was another technique which I forgot now. But nevertheless, it was mostly focused on how to maximize your learning process. But this video today is going to be about all the possible ways of learning a foreign language. And so many of them are available for free, but some of them will cost you a pretty penny. My goal is that by the end of the video, you know what method works best for you so that you don't end up wasting your money. Of course, we are going to start with the free stuff first, and the 2 main things here are language cafes and Tandem partners. So let's break down the advantages and disadvantages of both. So let's start with the language cafe first, and it means exactly what it says. You literally come to a cafe and you speak there, and you speak foreign languages there, right? And so I think some advantages are probably very obvious. I think one of the biggest advantages there is that when you come to a language cafe and you talk to different people, hopefully those people come from different environments, and so they speak the language differently, and so they also have different accents, right? Because depending on what your native language is, you will have a different accent. And so your advantage here is that you train your ear to hear these accents, and you learn to decipher what they are saying. Why? Because some accents can be really tricky. So when you work with people who have different accents, you kind of improve your accent, because you can hear what they are saying wrong, and then you know what the right variant is, and so you compare them and you'd be like, oh, okay, so I guess this is right. And sometimes if you cannot understand what other people are saying, maybe you can also correct them, so you also help other people, right? Also, why is it good to work with different people? Different people have different opinions, so most likely you will have to express your ideas and react to phrases which you've never heard before, or to the ideas which you've never heard before. And that is good for you, because in that case you are kind of more prepared for different situations. That's one thing. Another thing is, if you interact with people from different cultural environments, you also learn to avoid cultural misunderstandings. You learn how they are, you learn their way of doing things just by talking to them, right? And so the more you talk to them, the more you can see how different they are from you, and then you can also ask them, oh, do you always do that, or do you always react like that? But you have to show interest, right? It's not like you should retort them of doing something, but just be curious. Okay, and so also another thing with working with accents, let's say if you have a private tutor and you get used to working with that person, you get used to the choice of words that this person uses, because it is quite common that people normally just use this set of words that they have in their vocabulary. And yes, of course, their vocabulary can have a lot more words, it's just that people tend to get comfortable with the certain set that they are already comfortable with. Okay, so immersion, and then another advantage of that is that you actually find yourself at a real place, so the class is not happening online, but you have to actually be present there. Why is it trickier? Because you don't really have the option of like quickly googling something. I mean, you can still go on your phone, but most likely you will try to give the answer immediately. And that is good for you, because this way you can train the immediate response, and this way you can train your fluency. But then you have to be responsible, and that only works if you actually give answers, right? If you actually reply to questions, etc., and don't just listen silently. Right. And another advantage is that you can discuss anything. Because you meet with people who probably do the same thing as you do, or come from workplaces, are students, whatever. And so you will always have a different set of topics prepared. If you compare it to going to language schools already have the material prepared, so that you always know what is going to come next, or the teacher knows what's going to come up next. But in this case you don't, and so on one hand it's the advantage, on the other hand it's not. But there are certain difficulties that you have to consider before going to a language cafe and just see whether it suits you or not, because if you go to a language cafe, you have to make sure that people you're going to talk with are on the same level as you are, because or you are on the same level as they are, because if your level is way too low, then you will not be able to communicate with them. If your level is way too high, then it will be too boring for you, which is not cool, and meaning you will not learn anything new. And if your goal is to actually improve your language command and not just to hang out with people, then you should consider other options. But how do you make sure that the group matches your level? Well, if you are on the same page, if you can communicate freely and you see the conversation going, then you are on the same level, right? As for quality control, that's the previous point I mentioned. If normally in the class the teacher prepares all the materials that you have to work with, and so you already know the teacher kind of knows what words you have to learn. The teacher can even know what you have already learned, and the teacher can know where you make mistakes. If you go to a language cafe, it doesn't work that way, because other people you're meeting with are just regular people, so they have no idea of how to teach or how to correct. So you have to make sure that your dynamic goes in such a way that you actually work on the material that is useful for everybody, and maybe that is useful for you, if you're the only one who wants to take care of that. And also you have to make sure that you do practice the grammar that you want to practice and the vocabulary, because otherwise you're just kind of wasting your time. And so as for the dynamic, people are different. And so when you go to a language cafe, you obviously have to deal with people. And there are people who are like active listeners, and there are people who are big talkers. And so they will obviously take their roles in the cafe as well. And you have to make sure that you take the active role where you speak a lot, because that's your goal, right? You go to a language cafe, I keep on stumbling on that word, I don't know why. But if you go to a cafe like that, your goal is to speak there. And so if you give that role to somebody else, you lose it, obviously, right? Meaning you do not practice what you came there for. Meaning it has to be balanced. You have to listen and you have to speak, right? So it's like 50-50. I think it's pretty obvious why. If you listen to other people, you train your listening, right? You train your comprehension and you try to be a better person, right? Because it's important to listen to other people, but it's also important to speak and to be able to express your ideas. If you only speak, you don't let other people express their ideas, and then so it's no dialogue, right? It's no conversation, it's a monologue. But if you only listen, you do not develop your speaking skills. The thing I mentioned is finding a tandem partner. Why is it good? Because you get to talk to just one person. It's more comfortable, I suppose, right? You can choose the person that you like, so it's more personalized. And then you can also do it from anywhere, like you don't actually have to be present at some place, which makes it more convenient because it saves your time, it saves your energy maybe in a way, maybe you're more used to that format, And so you also benefit from teaching your... Oh wait, I forgot to explain how it works. So actually it works in a way that you find a person and then you teach that person your native language, and that person teaches you your target language, which is their native language, right? And so another benefit is that when you teach that person your foreign language, your native language, you kind of benefit from that in a way that you understand your native language better. And yeah, I know languages are different, they have different words, but they're not so unique, they're always the same. There's always the same system that it is built upon. Unless, I'm not talking about Chinese, I have no idea what there is in Chinese, but maybe there is something the same, right? But I mean like languages that use the Cyrillic or Latin alphabet, they are based on the same principles. And so when you understand those principles in your native language, it will be definitely easier for you to learn your foreign language. You have to deal with just one person. It's kind of easier to be inconsistent because you can be like, oh, I'm tired today, can we reschedule? But when there is a group, you kind of feel the group pressure, like compared to language cafe, so you have to go, or other people might push you to come, which is a good thing in a way. So when dealing with just one person, you can be, you know, slacking. So it's not always good for you. And then you have to make sure that the person that you choose as your tandem partner is actually proficient in the language. Otherwise, you're not going to be learning anything. And then you also need to see, and it's pretty much the same thing as for Language Cafe. You have to see that your levels match and that you give constant feedback and that you choose topics to practice and not just to yap about nothing. So now we're going to talk about premium options, paid options actually, the individual classes, and I would suppose it's probably the best paid options you could go for, because not because I advertise it for my own language school or anything, totally not. No, but really, if you choose a private teacher, like I said, a good private teacher will know what you have to learn. A good private teacher will know what you have already learned, meaning maybe they know what you have to rehearse, maybe they know what you have to refresh in your memory, maybe they know where you make mistakes, so they might want to make some focus on it. And so that saves your costs in the long run, because if you go to, like, okay, we will talk about that later, but it saves your costs in the long run, and you will see why. And so also when you when you have a private teacher, you can specify what you need and be like, oh, so I actually need business English. So you will only focus on that. And it is possible to learn grammar based on business English only, right? And so if you focus on that, if that is your main focus, you can do that, you know, why not? Right, so you can specify your wishes, which is a great advantage, I believe, because, like I said, it just saves your time. Okay, and now as for other things, what are the disadvantages? Well, you have to find the person that you're comfortable to work with. That's one, and two, it's quite expensive, right? Depending on where you live, but you know, at the end, it still is expensive, but it saves your money, you know. Okay, and now as for then you can also go to group courses, and you can do them both online and offline, and so it's cool because you know, like I said, you get to talk to many people, and then you see where other people make mistakes, if you can notice them. So it's kind of good for you, because you feel like you get this feeling, okay, I'm not stupid, you know, everybody else finds it difficult. But on the other hand, I think it has more disadvantages, because group learning always takes longer. Because if you are, let's say, if you do it online or offline, it doesn't matter in this case. You have to have these Zoom sessions or in real life, and so you will be divided into groups. And so it takes you longer to do one task if you had to do it on your own. You also depend a lot on the other person, so you cannot make sure that your levels match and that you both speak equally good. Meaning sometimes you either fall behind or you have to carry the other person that you work with in pairs, or it simply happens that nobody cares how good you learn something, because there is no time for that, because it is a group class. So a group class is always about giving material and you receiving, but there is often no checking for how well you learn the material. Okay, that is the biggest disadvantage, I think. And so mostly I think it's a waste of time. That is my personal opinion. Unless you still have a lot of practice on your own with somebody else, right? Like if you keep on learning on this side and it's not your main learning method, then you're good. But if it is your only learning method, then I'm gonna tell you it's gonna take you a while. Normally they're less expensive, right? And I think nowadays you can even book multiple group sessions on some language apps, you know, and they cost less. That's also the question, like, why do they cost less? You know, I mean, it's not like everything you buy should be expensive, but still, ask yourself the question. Okay, and so talking about language apps, yeah, nowadays there are so many. Which one do you choose? I say none, because language apps, like, just imagine learning a language, right? There are so many things. Like well, we know there's grammar and there's vocabulary, right? And so a language is basically that. Speaking the language is literally using both, right, and combining them. And now think of your language command speak of the language command of your native language. You probably can express yourself so well, unless you're like 12, because the older you get, the more words you learn. Okay, it's natural. And so or the more you read, the more words you know. And so as you grow up, you get to learn more words, so your vocabulary expands itself. Now think of how many words you know. Is it possible, just like thinking technically, right? Is it possible for a language to teach you that many words on the sentences that it gives you, the way that it gives you? I don't think so. Because let's say you had to at least go to school, for, let's say, from 11 to 13 years to learn to do all of that. Yeah, I mean, we can skip the first 4 years, okay? Well, maybe 3, because now you know how to write. But do you know, because you know how to write, but do you know how to express your ideas correctly in a foreign language? I mean, depends on, now the question is, and that is exactly what you have to learn. And think of how you did it at school. When you went to school, you actually had to write something on a sheet of paper, meaning you had to produce it yourself. When you get to work with a language app, you already have a prompt, right? And maybe you have to insert a word or something. Yeah, it does make you think of, okay, what ending do I use here? Or maybe what is the correct word here? But still, you get the prompt on its own is already visible on the screen, meaning your brain does not put in enough effort into actually coming up with the whole sentence. And you need whole sentences to be stored in your brain in order to speak fluently. And so you do not achieve that when working with language apps. And so now it doesn't matter whether you pay for it or you don't, like whether you get the premium versions or you don't, you're still not getting as much as you would be getting from communication with real people or from getting really highly qualified lessons. All of these tricks, like you've learned so many words today, or you've kept on learning for like 5 hours, whatever, they are just the illusion of progress, because in reality you learn way too slow and you learn way too little to progress for real. One more way to learn a foreign language, and that is just to live in the country. But look, unless you're 10, you're not gonna learn the language, or at least you're not gonna learn to speak it correctly. Because as we get older, our brain capacities just get lower, unfortunately, and so we don't not learn things as quickly as before. And so also, if you learn a language without any rules and you just hear things outside, unless you knew the rules before and you know how to apply them in a different language, which I believe mostly is not the case, it might be difficult for you to actually, connect the words that you hear to certain rules, because you simply don't know them, And so you might learn things in sentences, and that's what happens to kids often, right? They just gonna, there is a situation, there is some context, and then there is a phrase. And at the end, they simply remember that there is a phrase that was used in that context, so they will use it in a similar context, or maybe in the same one, because our life is not so unique, there are certain situations that repeat themselves. And so this is how they learn the language, and it just happens to be that their memory is a lot better than ours of adults. But yeah, that's simply why it works with children. But as for adults often don't focus on the conversation, not on the context, And by focusing on the conversation, you can compare it to cramming, like when you cram the night before the exam, you learn the material, but then quickly the day after you forget it. And so they focus on the conversation at the moment because it's important for them to understand it, and then after the situation is gone, they forget it, right? And so that's it. So on one hand, you can learn a lot of vocabulary, you can learn a lot of vocabulary, you can train your listening really well, because you have to listen. You hear the language literally every day all around you. But on the other hand, you lack real speaking. Okay, now the conclusion. So like if you're a total beginner, I don't know, you're watching this video, it's in English, right? So it's either that English is your native language, or if you manage to understand what I'm saying, right, then you are allowed to go to a language cafe or to find a tandem partner. If not, if English is your native language and you have no idea what your level is, get yourself tested and yeah, evaluate your level, and then you will figure out whether you can go to a language cafe or not. I would advise to go to a language cafe starting from B2 to like whatever. Why? Because you still want to talk there, right? If you can allow to have a private teacher, then go for it. If you can afford a private teacher, then go for it. It's definitely worth it. It saves your time in the long run rather than going to group classes. If not, then go to group classes because it's still something. But yeah, like I said in my previous video, I used to have just one class a week, you know, it was enough for me. But yeah, you have to make sure that you put in a lot of time in that, you know, it's not that you simply have one class a week and then you do nothing after that. It doesn't work like that. I still used to learn a lot. Yeah, so I think the best idea would be to do both, you know, to, for example, have a private tutor and learn with an app, you know, but still, I think the smartest option would be to like go to group classes for some grammar and get a private teacher. But you choose yourself, right? It's up to you. Now you know what options you have available, and then it's all up to you, you know, up to your budget and up to your skills.